Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
Fantastic, as always. This week is kind of a repeat of some topics we've talked about, but it never gets old. Today is all about night flying. Here we are. We're halfway through summer, maybe just past halfway through summer, and the days are getting shorter every day, and we're about to have a time change in a couple of months, and we're going to do a lot of night flying coming up. So what should we be doing? What should we be thinking about? Today is all about night flying. Wally, you fly big wide-body aircraft. Any idea how much day and night you do? Like just percentage? Is it 50-50, 30-70? How much day and night do you do?
I would say the type of flying I do, it would probably be 55% day, 45% night.
Nice. And I'm sure you see a lot of nice sunsets from 40,000 feet.
Oh yeah. And you know, a lot of flying that we do in wide body aircraft are red eyes, especially if you're going west to east. You're leaving in the middle of the night. You know, I may leave Hawaii at 8:00 p.m. their time. Arrive in Houston 6, 7 in the morning.
Yeah, been on a couple of those.
Yeah. And, you know, when we used to fly to Europe a lot, you know, most of the European flights leave late at night, fly all night, and get to Europe at 10 or 11 in the morning. So the majority of it is nighttime.
Cool. And obviously, again, pretty stuff. And while I hear people talk about, is it safe to fly at night? There's obviously different types of risk, but it's definitely safe to fly at night. I think you just have to do your due diligence. So let's just run through some things that we think about, that we have taught it to people at this flight school, that you have taught as a CFI, and that you have seen or maybe administered on check rides, and remind people, both your daughters and other students that you come in contact with, some best practices for night flying. So one thing that I think very few people think of to do, and I'm in a flight school environment, so I think of teaching all the time, is if you haven't flown at night in a while, just get in the cockpit, hook it up to external power, or turn the master switch on for 2 or 3 minutes. Please don't drain the battery. And just get your bearings again in the dark, in the cockpit. What lights are illuminating? What instruments? How do these dials work to dim or not dim the lights? Maybe I can dim or not dim my GPS. Maybe my iPad's on full bright. And that would be terrible to take off in an aircraft and then the screen come on your iPad and it be 100% and blind you while you're trying to make your first turnout. That's going to cause some disorientation and stuff. Yeah. So first big tip here is just sit in the aircraft, get comfortable with a dark nighttime setting. Make sure you have access to things that you want to have access to in that cockpit, and make sure you're acclimated. Maybe you haven't flown this particular aircraft at night ever. Be a great idea to sit in that aircraft and be prepared for what's going to be a flight in the dark.
Yeah. And, you know, you're talking about the iPad. I mean, if you go into ForeFlight under the settings, there's light settings, dark settings. There's all kinds of ways you can invert colors and do all kinds of things that may work better for you. But that's definitely something to think about, and you know, probably at 11 o'clock at night when you're hopping in an airplane isn't the time to be trying to learn these settings in ForeFlight. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and if you do happen to have it on your phone or iPad, you just click the settings button. The first thing at the very top is a little slide rule for brightness, and that'll change the brightness of your screen. Not just the application. So it's very helpful and very useful to dim that screen a little bit at night.
Yeah, one thing that we discovered in our 172, we have a Garmin 530, but we also have a 696, which is basically a VFR GPS that was in the airplane before we put the 530, and it's kind of over on the side, but it's a real nice big map display. And what we discovered is that you can dim that. The problem is that when you get back on the night flight, then you come back the next day and it's daytime. If it's dim, you can't see the screen to figure out how to brighten it up.
Does it have touchscreen or soft buttons that you have to push?
It has soft buttons.
So you can't see anything.
Yeah, you can't see anything. So what we've learned is that if we do fly that airplane at night, that when we come back in and put it in the hangar, we go in there while we can see the screen and brighten things up for the next day flight, because again, most of what we do is daytime. One thing that a good friend of mine always talks about is he says, the engine doesn't know that it's nighttime. And
sure sounds like it sometimes, doesn't it?
And I think anybody who's flown at night can relate to the engine making funny noises at night. I know the first time I flew over a large body of water on one of my solo cross countries, it was the Mississippi River. I was probably only 2,000 feet, and that river is really wide. And I promise that engine started coughing as soon as I got over that water. But yeah, the engine really doesn't know that it's nighttime. But obviously your options are less. They're less visible at night if you do lose an engine.
And that's the next big one is, allow for a little bit more time to prepare because you're going to need it. You might need it in the air as well, so fly a little higher. Let's talk about both of those real quick. Why might I fly a little higher at night than I would during the day?
Well, altitude gives you time. It gives you distance, too. If you're higher and you do have to we're talking about an engine failure here for the most part. If you do lose an engine, the higher you are, the more time you have before you're going to touch down, and the larger your radius of available landing spots is. So, 2,000 feet, you don't have a whole lot of time. Let's say the airplane descends at, let's just make easy math here, 500 feet a minute. At 2,000 feet, you got 4 minutes.
That's assuming you're really, really good at holding 500 feet.
Yeah. 8,000 feet, you got 16 minutes.
Yeah.
And,
a lot longer.
Yeah.
And I think allowing time isn't just on the ground. We will talk about that in a minute, but allowing more time for the flight to occur itself. I think I was taught early on, flying a lot between Houston and Austin, my instructors would tell me, why not fly over here 5 miles south of my line, my direct to line, and be right over to this big freeway called 290 all the way to Austin.
Yeah.
Like, why not track that?
Yeah.
What does that benefit me? Well, there's tons of lights. There's 6 lanes on both sides of the center line.
Right.
It's not too busy at nighttime. If I have an engine failure, where do you think I'm going to land?
Right.
And that's going to be the best choice. If I don't have an airport, I've got a runway that's about 200 miles long.
Right.
On my route.
Yeah.
But it does take me 15 minutes longer to fly that route because I got to get over to the road,
right.
And then I got to get back off that and kind of come back. So I got to allow for more time on that flight, which changes my fuel from day to night and other things. But it makes a lot of sense to track a big road like that if you have that option as well.
Yeah, and there will be difference of opinions on landing on roads versus landing not on roads. I would like the idea of landing on a road. I would like to land on something concrete or asphalt. But I can understand the philosophy of not landing on roads because you have bridges, you might have power lines, you might have signs, you might have cars to deal with. But the other side of that is, all right, if you don't want to land on a road, landing close to a road is probably a good idea too, just for getting help and emergency services.
And this road we're speaking of is a major, major highway between Houston and Austin, 2 of the top 20 cities in the United States. this road's feeder roads are probably bigger than most runways, right? And may have no traffic and may have lights. Of course, there are risks with signs and power lines and other things, but if I'm going to land in the dark or I'm going to land on the feeder road, I'm probably going to land on the feeder road every time.
Right.
So why would I add more time on the ground? Why would I allow myself more time on the ground if I was going to take a night flight? For me personally, it's harder to see things in the dark. Sometimes I'll come up here, if I'm doing my night currency, I'll come up here an hour before sunset and pre-flight the plane, make sure it's ready to go, make sure all my stuff's where I want it to be in the cockpit, and then I'll come inside and wait another hour after sunset before I go do my touch and goes or my stop and goes for my night currency. So that's a lot more than just coming up here and getting 3 landings during the day.
Right.
If it is dark, to walk around with a flashlight's a little bit more difficult. You just want your bearings. You want to make sure all the lights are working. I think you just spend a little bit more time pre-flighting an airplane in the dark than you do an airplane during the day.
Yeah, I agree.
Any other things that you would think of from allowing more time or flying higher that would help our listeners doing their night flying?
Well, I think as a new pilot, let's say a private pilot with relatively maybe less than 100 hours, less than 200 hours, to get your night currency, maybe another option would be come out and take off just right at dusk and let your eyes adjust to it rather than just jumping into full darkness. Take off with a little bit of light, a little bit less light, a little bit less light, and the next thing you know, it is full darkness. And just let your body get into it that way. I mean, if I'm going to learn to run a marathon, I don't go out and run 26 miles today. Maybe I run, a mile today, 2 miles tomorrow, 3 miles the next day. You build up to it, and just let your eyes adjust to the darkness as well.
So another thing that is important is lights. If you have a personal preference, whether it be a headlamp, flashlight, your iPhone, etc., I think one thing you want to do is try to avoid white light before you get right into the darkness, right? It's going to take a while for those eyes to adjust, as you said. There's most headlamps, especially around aviation pilot supply shops, are going to have a red light option. That red light helps your eyes see better after you turn the red light off. But the bad sign of that is if you happen to have a checklist that's written in red, see what happens when you shine a red flashlight on red lettering. It just disappears.
Right.
The flashlight that I carry has both a white, red, and green option. Green on red makes a checklist look really, really good that's printed in red. So things to think about. Take your lights, whatever those lights may be, headlamp, flashlight, iPhone, etc., and read your checklist with them in the dark. Make sure you can see all the words and any of the V speeds or anything you have on those documents to help you. It could make a big difference. And then make sure you have batteries. Man, how many people that fly very rarely do you think reach down to pick up that flashlight, push the needed button to illuminate light, and light not come on, Wally?
Yeah.
So check your devices. Seems like common sense, but more often than not, you might be surprised by how many times they don't work. So I carry actually a big flashlight. That's really for me to pre-flight the exterior of the aircraft and the interior if I need to, and if I'm remote and didn't get a chance to pre-flight it somewhere. I have a small one that's really in the cockpit, normally in the pouch to my left. That is the white, green, red option that I can use to find something or use it probably if I'm trying to resolve a problem quickly. And then I have a headlamp that I use really mostly during taxi operations that I am trying to get through the taxiing from Alpha to Bravo to get to my run-up area to do my run-up and read a checklist. And then I take the headlamp off once I get into flight. Any lighting tips or tricks that you have there, Wally?
No, the headlamp is something that I probably am a little bit less familiar with, or not familiar with, but haven't used very much. But it's a great tool. I play in a band, okay, and we do a lot of gigs at night. And what one of the guys in our band does is when we're breaking down, usually after the gig, sometimes they're outdoor venues, and he's got a headlamp. And I look over at him and I go, wow, he can see all the cables that he's unplugging, and I can't. So guess what I have now that I keep with my drumsticks is I keep a headlamp for breaking down after a gig. I mean, it's such a great thing. You put the headlamp on, and guess what? You have
everywhere
two hands.
you look, it has light,
and you have two hands.
Yeah.
You have two hands. It's unlike holding a flashlight. You only have one hand, or if the flashlight is small enough, you've got it in your mouth or whatever. But the headlamp is an excellent thing, and just like you said, everywhere you look, the light goes. You look in the fuel tank, and boom, guess what? You got light.
They aren't sponsors, but we'll give them a plug. That happens to be the Kingwood Jazz Venture.
All right.
And the band has recently played a gig at the flight school here, and they did a fantastic job. So if you're local, go try and catch them in the local area. They did really, really good for us. Kingwood Jazz Venture.
.com.
So we talked about lights. We talked about flying higher. What's the downside potentially maybe of flying higher that we have at nighttime as well?
Yeah, well, obviously, the higher we fly, the more susceptibility to lack of oxygen we are. Basically,
eyeballs need oxygen, right?
Right,
like that's in the.
Right.
I think that's in the airplane flying handbook and the pilot handbook of aeronautical knowledge. Your eyes consume a lot of oxygen.
Yeah, and it's more prevalent at night. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, and I don't. I remember back in my private pilot ground school days, we had the guy that taught it for me was an old World War II pilot. I want to say he said that in the military, above 10,000 during the day, the pilots are required to wear oxygen, and at night it's above 5,000. And this is the military, and these may or may not have changed. So there is a difference. So you need to be aware of that. It's that fine line. I mean, is there an advantage to flying higher? Yes. Is there a disadvantage to flying higher? Yes. So you've got to balance that. It's a little bit like weight and balance we talked about on an earlier podcast. I mean, there are advantages to a forward CG versus an aft CG. There's advantages to both, I should say.
Yeah, and we in the pilot supply here we sell a little can of it's just oxygen. It's called Boost. It's got a little mouthpiece on it. You put it over. It's really kind of a cup. You put it over your nose and mouth and take a little deep breath. You're getting a direct shot of oxygen out of a can. I think it's got like 200 squirts in this little can. The company that started that was not thinking about aviation, but thinking general purpose. When do people need oxygen? And I just went snow skiing during this off season or this fall and winter, and those are everywhere in the mountains because they are literally helping people breathe better in the mountains, right? So, pretty cool thing. Look for a can of Boost, and you can have that oxygen that'll give your eyes a little bit more gusto to see at night and maybe prevent you from seeing or not seeing what you want to see.
And the other thing is that you can do is you can get a pulse, I may mispronounce this, but a little thing to put on your finger that checks your oxygen saturation. And I know with the COVID being such a big thing, I know we've I have several of these that we keep in our airplane. We have a turbocharged airplane, so we fly up at higher altitudes. We do have oxygen in the airplane, but we're very aware of oxygen saturation, and we've actually loaned these to a couple of people who have had COVID, and they've kind of tracked their oxygen saturation using that. But that's another option. You can get those for fairly economically, $30-$40 or so. Probably not a bad investment.
Yeah, I think in general, we're just sitting here talking, saying like you should just be aware of how your body's going to react.
Right.
If you don't fly at night regularly or stay current, don't just jump in a plane and climb to 9,000 feet and don't think about the consequences of what's going to happen to your body. Reread the PHAC or the Airplane Flying Handbook and get a little knowledge about what you might be susceptible to during night flying.
Right.
I think about, we've talked about this a few times. I'm a visibility junkie when it comes to flying during the day because I think we think about cloud decks so much more frequently, but visibility is such a bigger problem for pilots, young pilots, student pilots who are flying, trying to do their cross country. So I beat visibility into people around here a lot. And at nighttime, it's 10 times worse. I mean, if you think about flying in Houston at night, it's really not very different than day because there's so many lights. There's so much that gives you visual reference to the ground. It's very VFR-like.
Right.
But if you turn a little bit north and you're between Houston and Dallas, it's black.
Right.
It's black for a long, long way.
Right.
And you add a little bit of mist or a little bit of haze or a little bit of Sahara dust or a little bit of anything that creeps into your visibility range, you can get disoriented really, really quick.
Yeah.
Even up to and like IFR flying for sure.
Right.
And if you're not an IFR pilot, you have to really be ready for what's about to happen physiologically to your body.
Right.
And be ready for it. So I think any precipitation, any rain that's going to be in the area or anything that's going to cause a visibility problem. I think we just went through our second round of Sahara dust in the Houston area, and it was a deck right at 4,000 or 5,000 feet, and below that you were just flying in sand dust, and it was very different than in a clear day for sure.
Yeah, and we see that down in Galveston. A lot of the instructors will take students down to Galveston to do some night flying down there. I think is a great thing because south of Galveston, there's nothing but the Gulf of Mexico, and there's no reference to anything.
It actually might be worse than no reference because there are some oil rigs out there,
right.
And based on their position, they create an angled horizon.
Yes,
and it could make you feel like you're spinning or turning when you're not turning.
Yeah. I've always said that I think one thing that we talk about a lot on private instrument and commercial check rides is a loss of a vacuum pump and what instruments that we're going to lose. And I think if most people know that the vacuum pump is out and that attitude indicator is bad, I think they do a pretty good job. I think the tough part is recognizing it, recognizing that we've had a vacuum pump failure, and that artificial horizon, it doesn't just pop up and say, this isn't working. It slowly goes away. And I always have thought that the worst case scenario would be a VFR night where you're VFR, so you're thinking, hey, I can see everything, and you're kind of following your instruments, and you slowly put the airplane in a bank and slowly put the airplane in a bank, and then it could be very bad.
Yes.
So,
yeah, if it was a gradual failure, it would be very, very hard. And a great way to practice that is in a simulator, especially one with motion, and you let the instructor turn that vacuum pump to let it gradually go. You will turn that plane sideways for sure.
Right.
Before you recognize it. And then I think for me, the key thing is to cover it up. And if I get to cover it up, I'm a pretty good pilot. But if I can visually still see it, I think my mind's playing tricks on me because I scan it so often when I'm flying.
Yeah, I mean, and it is strategically located right. It's the main instrument you look at.
If you had a headlight on, it would be shining on that instrument for sure. So think about visibility, think about precipitation, think about anything that might be limiting your visibility, and know that you will get disoriented if you're not careful. Airport lighting. It depends on where you fly out of, but I'm hoping that you have airport lights. You need to understand those airport lights, how they're controlled, what does it look like when they're on low, medium, and high. I always think I want them on high, but when I turn them on high, I'm like, golly, that's really bright.
Yeah.
And then low looks really, really good to me after all.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure before you left your landing light and any other taxi lights or things that you're depending on to be working are working and working well, so that you can see when you're landing and where you're landing. Will make a big, big difference in your final destination, I can assure you. We just recently locally went through a problem where one of the airports locally has a NOTAM that almost seems hidden, and the airport lights are out. And I think if you experience that where you get to that destination, you'll start really understanding why you have 30 minutes of extra fuel during the day and 45 extra minutes of fuel at night, and what all that's going to do to make you a safer, better pilot. So pay close attention to that.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with that airport. I'm familiar with that NOTAM, and quite to tell on myself, I had to look up what that the codes for that NOTAM. Now, why it just can't say runway lights out of service, I don't know.
Because 50 years ago they didn't have enough spots, but hopefully they'll get that changed one day.
Yeah, and you know, I don't have an answer, but there's a code, and I had to look it up. I went, holy cow, that's runway lights. The runway lights are in up.
So speaking of fuel, how important is fuel? Man, I know we've had this conversation a lot. Wally, you put it in the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 spot on items of importance. I think at night, my personal minimum is landing with an hour of excess fuel. I want to have an hour of fuel when I land. I think anything could cause a problem to where you might have to hold or divert or fly further. And the last thing you want to do is be worrying about fuel.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've listened to way too many videos and audio tracks of people that were flying who you could tell were stressed with fuel problems and didn't come right out and say they were having a fuel problem and ultimately got hurt. I think if you're ever in that circumstance during the day or night, you need the ATC guys said it. Declare you have a big problem and ask for help. Don't hesitate. Don't delay. And boy, at night, there's no way I would play around with that. I would not try to be cool. I would not try to be stoic. I think I would probably start crying and tell them I need to get on the ground. I have a fuel problem.
Right.
It's just one you can't mess with. It's another one of those non-negotiables for sure.
Yeah.
One of the best night flying tips that I can give, and it seems like it happens a lot around the flight school, something must come up and someone wants to go fly their girlfriend somewhere. They have a trip they're going to be flying at night. They haven't been staying current. They come up. They want to get checked out. They want to get current at night again so they can rent a plane the next day and take a girlfriend or a family member on a trip. How good are you thinking they're going to be at flying at night, Wally, if they haven't flown at night in 2 years?
Probably not very good.
Very good.
Yeah.
And I don't like it when they fly here like that because it's not good for my aircraft. It's not good for them. It's not safe for their passengers. So the best tip we can give you is stay current. It does cost a little bit of money. It does take a little bit of time and planning. But the best thing you can do for yourself and your aviation career is to stay current. And when I say stay current, I don't mean 91 days or 89 days, not right on the bubble.
Right.
Like fly fairly regularly at night and be a good nighttime pilot. For those of you that want to be airline pilots, you have to fly 100 hours.
Right.
The regulation 61.159 says to be eligible for an ATP, you need 100 hours of nighttime flying. That means if you're a 1,500-hour airline pilot or ATP qualified pilot, that's a lot of time, right? So what's the math on that, Wally? How many night hours should I have? Around 500?
About a third. 33. Yeah.
And so if I get to 500 hours and I'm a CFI and I have 10, what should I be doing?
I think you should be asking your students to fly at night.
That's right.
Get out there. Get out there at night.
And time share, time build, do some cross countries at night with your friends, split rates, whatever you want to do to get that nighttime in the logbook. Do it early and often so that you're not scrambling. I have seen too many CFIs ready to go to the airlines who had this big requirement of 100 hours that you can't just go out on one night and get 100 hours of flight time.
Yeah. 1,500 hours and 17 hours of nighttime. And now they're going out and they're renting an airplane for 83 hours. And it's not quite 83 hours because there is some relief in the regulation about reducing that number based on takeoffs and landings, but we won't get into that. But if you really want to get into it, you can look in.
Either way, you're going to have at least 75, so it's
right.
a lot of time.
Right.
If you want to go rent a plane on your own dime, do it. But at the end of the day, the best way to do it is with your students if you're a CFI. Time bill with your friends if you can. Make sure you're logging all that nighttime and getting credit for it, because it's going to be very expensive if you have to do it at the tail end of all that flight time you did.
Right.
Proper planning will not create a bigger emergency for you or your flight school. Anything else to close with, Wally, as we talk about night flying?
No, I do want to just tease an upcoming episode. We've mentioned this before, but we're real excited to announce that in the next coming weeks, I'm not sure the exact date, we're going to have the just retired chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board join us, Robert Sumwalt. He's going to talk to us about his 15 years as NTSB board member and as chairman. So that should be a very, very interesting show.
Well, I'll plug a show too then. We have the local soaring clubs in the greater Houston area are going to be on the show as well and tell all of us power plant pilots how to fly without a power plant and things we can and should be doing to be better pilots by going and maybe getting our glider rating. I'm looking forward to having that group on the show as well, and they're going to give me a discovery flight, so I get to go up and land and not have any power. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but they do it all the time, so it's got to be safe, right, Wally?
Yeah. Actually, my father was a glider pilot in World War II. He was part of the Normandy invasion, flying a CG-4A glider on June 6th.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yep.
All right, with that, as always, thanks for listening to the show and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.